Believe it or not, an eel, a tiny Caribbean island, and artificial intelligence have one thing in common in the most unexpected way, and it all goes back to a naming choice made centuries ago. Because of a weird linguistic coincidence, this island's government budget just jumped by 20% in a single year, and that number could keep climbing as long as the AI boom continues. But how is that even possible? The island I'm talking about is Anguilla. When European explorers first spotted it back in the day, they called it Anguilla, which means eel in Spanish and French, simply because the island is long and thin, just like an eel sitting in the ocean. The name actually comes from the old Latin word for the fish. To give you an idea of how small we're talking, only about 15,000 people live there. That's barely half the crowd at a typical NBA game. On top of that, the land is super dry and the soil is thin, meaning you can't really farm anything. They have almost zero natural resources. Decades ago, they survived, mostly on fishing. Then, starting in the 80s, they tried pivoting to tourism and offshore banking. You know, the kind of stuff that's often a bit of a legal gray area. But even with all those efforts, Anguilla was still struggling. Their average income sat around $19,000. Which is roughly the same as countries like Romania or Guyana. They were just getting by, until a massive tech gold mine literally fell into their lap. And the craziest part? They didn't have to lift a single finger to get it. AI. So how did this tiny island end up with the .ai domain in the first place? The real drama started in 1974, when the world began standardizing country codes into 2- and 3-letter formats under ISO 31661. Usually, these codes follow the country's native name. For instance, Spain became ES or ESP for España, Mexico used MX or MEX, and Croatia became HR or HRV for Hrvatska. Pretty straightforward, right? But if two countries fight over the same letters, things get messy. Take Panama and Paraguay, for example. Both start with PA. Panama snatched up PA, forcing Paraguay to compromise and pull another letter from its name, turning into PY. And that's the exact trap Anguilla fell into. Starting with AN, they faced some brutal competition against 5 other territories: Andorra, Angola, Antarctica, Antigua and Barbuda, and the Netherlands Antilles. In the end, the Netherlands Antilles scooped up the coveted AN code, leaving everyone else to scramble for the leftovers. But here's where fate stepped in. It wasn't until 1980, when Anguilla finally became its own separate British territory, that it actually needed its own spot. As luck would have it, the code AI happened to be vacant because its previous owner had changed its name. Anguilla stepped in, grabbed it, and by 1995, it officially became the island's internet domain. The kicker? By 2010, the Netherlands Antilles didn't even exist anymore. But its brief stint on the map lasted just long enough to make sure Anguilla walked away with the 2 most valuable letters of the 21st century. Just think about it. If they had ended up with AG or AL back then, they'd probably still be just a quiet fishing spot today. Talk about winning the ultimate tech lottery. Back in the 80s, when domain extensions like .es or .mx first popped up, they were just digital addresses for different countries. But it didn't take long for techies to start getting creative. They came up with something called domain hacking. Basically, people stopped caring about where the extension came from and started focusing on what it sounded like. You've definitely seen those shortened links like youtube.be or reddit.it. That's exactly what was happening. Radio stations started snapping up Armenia's .am, DJs went crazy for Djibouti's .dj, and businesses grabbed .bz because it sounded like, well, business. For most countries, this was just a drop in the bucket. It didn't really move the needle for their economy. But there was one legendary exception that showed everyone how it's done: Tuvalu. Tuvalu is this tiny island nation in the Pacific, with only about 12,000 people. Honestly, there isn't much to do there besides fishing. But the moment they realized their .tv country code matched the universal shorthand for television, the government didn't waste any time. Way back in 1998, they actively started commercializing and licensing out the domain rights. That move originally brought in $5 million a year, and it eventually jumped to around $10 million annually, funding over 11% of their entire national budget. And that is exactly the kind of playbook that set the stage for Anguilla. After securing their lucky country code in 1980, Anguilla officially registered and launched the .ai internet domain in 1995. But unlike Tuvalu, which struck gold almost instantly with the television boom, Anguilla wasn't quite so lucky. For nearly 30 years, those two letters were completely ignored by the rest of the world, bringing in a pathetic amount of cash. We're talking just $100 per domain for a 2-year registration. Ever since television was invented, technology has been moving at lightning speed, and right now, we're living in the era of artificial intelligence. This global boom has officially turned the tiny island of Anguilla into a tech powerhouse in the most unexpected way. For a long time, registration was a modest $50 a year, which then bumped to $60. By April 2023, capitalizing on the massive ChatGPT craze taking over the world, they raised the price to $70 a year, processed as a $140 flat fee for a 2-year registration. And man, did that bet pay off. As the tech world went into an AI frenzy, registrations skyrocketed from under 50,000 back in 2020 to smashing past the massive 1 million domain milestone in early 2026. Think about it. Thousands of new tech sites are popping up every single day, and every new .ai registration sends another fee into this 15,000-person island's domain economy. Even better, the renewal rate hovers around 90%, giving the island a guaranteed, steady stream of passive income year after year. The financial updates are absolutely mind-blowing. Anguilla's domain revenue exploded from just $4 million in 2020 to a staggering $93 million in 2025. To put that in perspective, that single domain extension now funds nearly half, about 47% of the entire country's national budget, completely crushing the government's initial forecasts. And you've got to realize by 2026, the required 2-year registration fee has already hit a whopping $160. Over the next few years, you're going to see Anguilla shoot straight up the global GDP per capita charts. And since their population is so tiny, the everyday citizens are going to feel that wealth fast. Not bad for a quiet fishing island that just happened to own the 2 most valuable letters on the internet. But sudden money can be dangerous. When a small economy gets flooded with cash from one booming resource, everything else can get distorted. Prices rise, wages rise, other industries become less competitive. Economists sometimes call this Dutch disease. And for a place like Anguilla, that would be a real problem, because AI is not the whole economy. Tourism still matters a lot. But Anguilla has an unusual shield. It doesn't have a floating currency of its own. It uses the East Caribbean dollar, which is fixed to the US dollar. So the AI boom can pour money into the government budget without making Anguilla's currency suddenly soar. There's another difference too. This is not oil. Anguilla doesn't have to build giant refineries, hire a massive industrial workforce, or dig anything out of the ground. The domain money is much lighter than that. A digital asset, paid for by companies around the world, flowing into one very small government budget. That means luxury tourism can stay competitive while the government gets a rare chance to upgrade the island. Better roads, better public services, and stronger infrastructure. In other words, the real test is not whether Anguilla can make money from .ai. It's whether they can turn a temporary tech boom into something permanent. So what are they doing with the money? This is where Anguilla's story gets more interesting than just small island gets lucky. Because winning a digital lottery is one thing, not wasting it is another. Anguilla's strategy is smarter than it first looks because they are not just sitting back and living off the hype. For a community this small, that kind of cash is a total game changer. Unlike Tuvalu, which signed away much of its upside early on for a flat annual fee, Anguilla has kept the domain closely tied to government revenue. They now work with Identity Digital as their global registry provider, giving the domain stronger infrastructure while keeping the financial upside tied to Anguilla. That may sound like a boring back-end detail, but for Anguilla, it matters a lot. The AI money is not just disappearing into some vague government account, it is helping pay for things people can actually see and use. We're talking brand new lines of asphalt, free healthcare for kids under 5 and the elderly, and upgraded schools. They are even funding a massive multi-million-dollar expansion of the Clayton J. Lloyd International Airport to bring in larger commercial flights and give tourism a massive boost. Plain and simple, this digital goldmine can support more local jobs, ease pressure on residents, and help the island reduce public debt. It may also give young talent more reasons to build a future at home instead of leaving for better opportunities elsewhere. So, in a strange way, artificial intelligence is helping rebuild the physical economy. But the smartest part may be the hurricane protection. Anguilla sits in a part of the world where one major storm can change everything. Hurricane Irma in 2017 was a brutal reminder of that. And older storms like Luis and Lenny taught the same lesson. When you live on a small island, physical infrastructure is always vulnerable. That is why moving the AI registry onto a global cloud platform is such a big deal. If a severe hurricane hits the island, the beaches, buildings, roads, and power lines may suffer. But the digital registry does not have to go down with them. The money machine can keep working while the island rebuilds. That turns .ai into more than a lucky domain. It becomes a financial safety net. And Anguilla seems to understand something many boom economies learned too late. You cannot ride hype forever. AI may stay hot for decades, or the bubble may cool. Companies may keep paying for AI domains, or one day they may move on to something else. So the real strategy is not to pretend this windfall will last forever. It is to use the good years to build things that still matter after the hype fades. Better infrastructure, lower debt, stronger public services, and a stronger cushion for the next hurricane season. That is the difference between getting lucky and getting smart. Anguilla did not invent artificial intelligence. It did not build the models, train the chatbots, or design the chips. But thanks to 2 letters it received decades ago, it now has a rare chance to turn a naming accident into a national upgrade. Think about that the next time you browse the web. Every single time you use tools like Claude.ai, X.ai, or Perplexity.ai, a cut of that money is flying straight to a tiny Caribbean island of 15,000 people. It is literally building their schools, upgrading their clinics, and protecting their coastlines from rising sea levels. It's a mind-blowing story of how 2 ancient Latin letters, through a total stroke of luck with an ISO country code, are now funding the future of a territory in the digital age. If AI systems eventually move away from the AI domain, or if the tech bubble bursts, do you think Anguilla's green infrastructure will save them, or will they crash right back to square one? Drop your theories in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button to catch more content on Simple But Surprising.